Hey, church, it's Pastor Luke here with another episode of First Looks. And we have been moving through the book of Hebrews, and now we come to Hebrews chapter 7. And last week's text in chapter 6 was really difficult because of how severe the warnings are. Here in chapter 7, we have another difficult passage, but difficult for a little bit of a different reason, because really the argument that's being made about who Christ is and his supremacy flows from an Old Testament character by the name of Melchizedek. You see it even right here, straight out the gates. We've mentioned Melchizedek so far in this, as we've gone through Hebrews. His name has popped up a few different times, but now the author of Hebrews is gonna expound upon who Melchizedek was typologically for revealing who Christ is in reality. And so Melchizedek, he shows up a couple times in the Old Testament. In Genesis chapter 14, he shows up for a couple verses, and then in Psalm 110, his name shows up once. And so, based on really a few verses, the author of Hebrews now is going to provide some serious, really significant theology about Christ and what he's accomplished. And so for us, makes it a little tricky, but again, the implications are really, really beautiful. So before we dive into this text right here, I do just want to take a moment to look at those two passages that Melchizedek shows up in the Old Testament. So the first one is Genesis 14. You'll see that in the left column on the screen. And so what happened here, what's going on right here is that Abraham, he went off to go rescue Lot, who was taken captive by a couple of tribal village kings that banded together and went to war against some of these other kings, in which Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot lived, they were part of those kings. And so just this little battle, skirmish, so to speak, in which these aren't kings of like empires as we might think of it. It's not like big nations that were coming together like some kind of world war. This is where kings who were over maybe a particular town or small region, they team up together to go off on some common mission together. Well, they ended up taking Lot. Abraham takes his people, goes, rescues Lot, brings him back, and it says this in 17. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh. That is the King's Valley. All right, so the king of Sodom is coming out to meet Abraham, but notice this. Here comes this Melchizedek guy. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, he's not the king of Sodom. Let's be very clear about that, because Sodom is not a great place, as we remember from our Bible reading. This is a different king from a different place. Melchizedek, the king of Salem. He brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abram." I'm saying Abraham for just making the connection, but this is before the name change that he receives. So blessed be Abram, by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me persons, but take the goods for yourselves." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me.'" And that's it. That's really, if you look at this, Abram was with Sodom, the king of Sodom, and the other kings, and they're returning. And the king of Sodom, he comes to provide to say thank you to Abram for going out there and rescuing his men, and to provide some, some say take the spoils for yourself and things like that. And then in 21, the king of Sodom said to Abram, take these things for yourself. But it almost is as if Melchizedek here kind of comes right in the middle of this otherwise fluid narrative. If we were to take verses 18 through 20 out of Genesis 14, it would flow very well about King Abram and the king of Sodom interacting. But God, in his divine intentions, inserts Melchizedek in between the conversation. Now, we would say yes, because it was a historical fact, and this is how the story actually went. But from a theological standpoint, we say, what is going on here? And then Melchizedek doesn't show up again in the Bible until Psalm 110, which happens to be the most quoted Old Testament passage in the whole New Testament. Psalm 110 is quoted in the New Testament more than any other passage. And primarily it's verse 1. That says, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments. From the womb of the morning, the dew of your youth will be yours. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings on the day of his wrath." And so Melchizedek shows up in this psalm as this future priest king who will ultimately bring the judgment of God and a forever priesthood. Okay, now let's just keep that on our minds, and let's go back to our text here in Hebrews. Okay, so here we go. For this, Melchizedek, king of Salem, we saw that in Genesis 14, priest of the Most High God, saw that in Genesis 14, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and he blessed him. And to him, Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. Now this right here, let me just say that when we talk about giving 10% as a tithe literally means a tenth. And so he gives a tithe, he gives a tenth, Abraham does, to Melchizedek. He won't give anything to Sodom, and he won't take anything from the king of Sodom. He doesn't want anything to do with Sodom because Sodom is wicked. Abraham got involved to save Lot, not because he owes anything or wants anything from Sodom. But to Melchizedek, he willingly gives a tenth of everything. Okay, now we're going to get a little exposition from the author of Hebrews about this Genesis 14 passage. Notice this. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. And then also he is the King of Salem. Okay, so let's look at this right here. This word right here, that is king in Hebrew. This right here, tzedek, is how you'd say righteousness. This is a Hebrew translation of the name. Now, this is important because names in the Old Testament carry a whole lot of significance. And so the author of Hebrews here picks up on his name and says this is important. He's the King of Righteousness, and he is the King. All right. Don't need much translation to say king means king of Salem. Okay. Now, in Hebrew, the vowels weren't carried. The vowel points in Hebrew are added in after the fact so that we can help interpret and translate better. Now, but originally it would have been like this, S-L-M, okay? Now, we translate that as Salem, but it is very close and probably most likely connected to Shalom, all right, which equals peace in Hebrew. And why are we connecting this to Salem? Because this is also, he was probably the king of what became Jerusalem, okay? So he was probably the original king of Jerusalem before Israel takes the promised land, and David, makes Jerusalem headquarters, and then, you have the development from there. But the author of Hebrews is going to make note of that because he's going to say the king of righteousness and the king of peace is Jesus. There we go. King of peace. There we go. So first, he makes that point right there. And as we look at this, really what we see happening over on the side is the identity of Melchizedek as typology of Jesus. Okay. So his identity is going to be the basis of this launching point for the author of Hebrews in all of this. Okay, now he is, next point, he is without father or mother or genealogy. Okay, and then I'm going to make another little point over the side of this, over here. Genesis is a book of beginnings, and it has a lot of genealogies. Melchizedek, with all his significance, and his significance, though short in the narrative, is there in that Abraham bows to him, submits to him, and tithes towards him. It was very close to worshiping towards him, and that's why some people will say that Melchizedek was actually a Christophany, not a Christ type. Christophany meaning an appearance of Jesus before the incarnation. I don't believe that because of some of the language of Hebrews here, but you can make a case either way, and it doesn't really change too much of the text here. But Genesis, with Melchizedek, with all of his significance, has no record of ancestry, no genealogy. And that's really important in the book of Genesis. We have a lot of genealogies going in throughout that book, and there's a lot of covenant being made to Abraham, and that's so important. We cannot minimize the significance of Abraham and his genealogical line. Christ will come from that genealogy, but Melchizedek, he has no father or mother, and he has no record of beginning of days or end of life. But and because of that, he, therefore, let's go over here, just change up our colors. Theological point, resembles the Son of God. Okay? Now, the word resembling right there, that's one of the reasons that I think that Melchizedek is a figure in the Old Testament narrative that is a type that points to Christ as the antitype, meaning the real thing, the substance of it, because it says resembling the Son of God. So with that, we say, oh, well, we know where Jesus came from. We have his genealogy. It's in Matthew. It's in Luke. Matthew traces his ancestry through David and back to Abraham. Luke traces the genealogy all the way back to Adam. And so we say the Son of God does have ancestry. But what he is making a point of is the divinity of Christ. The theological point is that Christ is divine and therefore eternal, and therefore a lot of therefores right here we go. He is a priest forever. Now this is really important because of Melchizedekian priesthood theology that Christ is coming into as the king priest that he is. You can trust that his priesthood is eternal. You cannot trust that about the Levitical priesthood. That's a point that's going to be made next. So, as we move down into this next section here, see how great this man was to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the spoils. Okay, and let's just make note right here. Right here. This just kind of justifies this point, the Melchizedekian significance. He's so significant, the Jews knew it. They talked about Melchizedek a lot. There's Dead Sea Scrolls that talked about different theories about Melchizedek. He was important to the Jews, even though the details were rather few, because Father Abraham, the father of faith, the original recipient of the covenant of blessing, he tithes to Melchizedek, and he's going to start to make this point about the Levitical priesthood, because the priests all come from the tribe of Levi, and you got to be a Levite. You got to come from the tribe of Levi in order to be a priest in the Mosaic covenant. Okay. So the descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these are descended from Abraham. But this man who does not have his descent from them receives tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. This is a good big point right here. Blessed him who had the promises. We are in Genesis chapter 14 when Melchizedek shows up. Genesis 12 is the first iteration, almost, that's maybe not the best word, of the Abrahamic covenant. I say first iteration because it will also show up in, chapter 15, 17, and I want to say 21. Yeah, 21. And each time you get more and more details. It kind of builds upon itself. But God made the initial covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. So he was the recipient of the promise of God to be the father of many and to be blessed. And even though he's got the promises of God given to him, he still receives the blessing of Melchizedek. And then here's the big point for us. I'm going to make this green. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. Okay? One greater than Abraham. Melchizedek greater than Abe. Okay? And you know Abraham is significant to Israel. And so this is a really big case that's being made. This might seem minor to us, so far removed, but for the Jewish Christians who were receiving this letter from the author of Hebrews, for him to make the case that Melchizedek is greater than Abraham and to say it's beyond dispute, that would have been jarring. Not that they would have disagreed with it necessarily, because it's there in the text, but it certainly would have caught the attention. And then when he's starting to make the case that Christ is what Melchizedek was pointing to, they're really going to be leaning in on that. So picking back up here, in the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So here's the trail of thought right now. Is Abe is greater than Levi as the patriarch, the ancestor, and so therefore, Melchizedek is greater than Abe. Therefore, let me move it over just a little bit. Therefore, Melchizedekian priesthood is greater than Levitical priesthood. He's just starting to make the argument. He's going to take it even further. Okay. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law. This is an important connection here. I'm going to change colors. Just a moment. There we go. Let's go that one. There we go. Through Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law. We're going to see the connection start to show up between priesthood and law. They're bound together. Okay, so the Mosaic law, all right, that's Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Exodus. The Mosaic law is directly connected to the Levitical priesthood. All right, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? And so the case he's making is, if the Aaronic, or we could say Levitical priesthood could save with its law, why would another be needed? But it couldn't save. And so we needed another one. Now look at this. This is critical stuff here. Critical. For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. Okay. All right. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever wondered why we eat bacon this side of the cross? Have you wondered why we don't have to cleanse ourselves with the same regularity to come to church? We don't have to cleanse ourselves at all to come to church. We are cleansed, but hopefully you still take a shower before you come to church for out of love for your neighbor. but we don't need to ritually. All right, we don't observe the Old Testament Mosaic commands because they were bound to the Levitical priesthood. When Christ came as a Melchizedekian priest, he brought about another law. We call it in the New Testament the law of Christ. and it's in Galatians. It shows up a variety of places. For the one whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah. Okay? Jesus could not be a Levitical priest. Jesus could not be a Levitical priest because he was from Judah. And he had to be from Judah in order to fulfill the Davidic covenant. He had to be from Judah to fulfill Davidic covenant in 2 Sam 7. Okay? The promise was made to David that the Messiah will come from David's line. But when he came as a priest, he couldn't be a priest from the Levitical line because he wasn't a Levite. We would see, look at Saul, who as the king of Israel, he started doing priestly duties, and that's what really got him the kibosh. Is when he, as the king, started to mix with the roles and responsibilities of the priests because he wasn't a Levite. Okay? In connection with that tribe, Moses has nothing to say about priests. See, Moses has nothing to say about priests when he talks about Judah. Okay? This becomes even more evident when another priest in the likeness. That's another reason why, another one of the words that makes me think that Melchizedek is a Christ type, not a Christophany. There is another priest that arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but on the power of an indestructible life, for it is witnessed of him. Okay, so this right here, this is the grounds. This is the grounds for the superiority and eternality of Jesus's priesthood, because of the power of his indestructible life. He did not enter into this role simply because he was like any of the other many Levites. He is something categorically different. And now we have the connection, moving from Genesis 14, we start to have the connection of Psalm 110. And so we were doing a lot of kind of Genesis 14 exposition. Now that is going to become Psalm 1 exposition right here, because Jesus is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. Okay? Mosaic law set aside because it is weak and useless. For the law made nothing perfect. The law made nothing perfect. Does that mean that the law was bad or wrong? No, the law is good. Galatians, because it shows us our sinfulness and our inability. Its intent was never to save. Rather, it was to expose our neediness and sinfulness. So on one hand, I'm going to change up colors again here. Let's go with kind of an orange here. So we have on one hand, and then we have on the other hand. A better hope is introduced through which we draw near. On one hand, law is weak. On the other hand, a better hope from a better law with a better priesthood is introduced that allows us access into the throne room of God, which immediately is going to take us back to chapter 5, verse, 11? Chapter 4. Getting my Hebrews mixed up here. 14, I want to say. Go back and read the end of 4 and you'll find it right away. So on one hand, law is weak. And then on the other hand, new law is able. It works. Now it is not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one is made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn, and he will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." So this is what's important here. Levitical law, no oath. So the point is that it is and always was intended to be temporary. Okay? Melchizedekian law with oath. And the oath is priest forever. Eternal. It is an eternal priesthood. Okay. So the Levitical law was never intended to last forever. It was only intended to serve a purpose for a particular time. When Christ came, and he did perfectly fulfill and live the Levitical law, he was the only one who could. And so he fulfills that. He fulfills the all that the Mosaic and law and Levitical priesthood pointed to and anticipated as the great high priest, as the ultimate sacrifice, as the ultimate access to God. Jesus fulfills all of it. He says, "I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law." But he did not. Because he completely fulfilled the Levitical law, he put a close to it, and it did not need to proceed any further. It was terminated for its purposes. And then the Melchizedekian law is initiated, and this one is not serving a temporary purpose, it is eternal. And that makes Jesus here the guarantor of a better covenant. And so I think when I was kind of mapping out this sermon series, kind of the big idea title that I kind of attached to this is for this message, it'll be the title of the message is that Jesus is supreme over the old covenant. Now, in some ways, we could say that he's supreme as the high priest, as we'll see next year, but we used that a couple weeks ago in chapter 5, 4, and 5. So old covenant, because his priesthood, we see the purpose of his priesthood in just a moment. It's a better covenant because it's eternal. Better because it's forever. The former priests were many in number. They were prevented by death from continuing in office. no other human priest could bring an eternal priesthood, because they all kept dying. But he holds his priesthood permanently. Jesus holds his priesthood permanently because he tasted death in the crucifixion, but he conquered death, and now he lives forever because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost. Yes, to those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives. How beautiful. He always lives to make, he's forever making intercession. Wow. There's so much we could say there, and I'm not going to even start going down that road because I'm going to save it for Sunday. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. Look at what we learn about our high priest here, our good high priest, Jesus Christ. He is a high priest who is holy. He is innocent. He is unstained. He is separated from sinners. He is exalted in the heavens, above the heavens. And that's just hearkening back to chapter 1. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. He did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, let's go green. But the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. And so, what is the oath that came after the law? It's Psalm 110. Is the oath that promises a future priest king who would bring a forever covenant. And that is Jesus. Now, the implications are going to be really significant when we start talking about law and how we live as members and recipients of the covenant. But that's going to take a little bit more thought and cross-referencing, and that's going to be beyond the scope of this right here, which is just an initial look at Hebrews chapter 7. But we can see this is jam-packed with theology, but theology that goes to work in our lives to draw us to a place of awe and wonder and worship at Christ, who is supreme over the old covenant. I hope you're excited about this. I hope that you'll spend some time thinking over, praying over, meditating over this passage in preparation for Sunday. Please, as always, I like to ask that you be praying for me as I craft this message. May it be something that exalts Jesus and edifies his people, that we would be knit together, stirred up to love and good deeds, and that our lives would be lives that are all about making Jesus known in this area of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and to the ends of the earth. And so with that, we will see you soon. God bless, church.